Hey, g'day, it's Prezzo. Thanks for stopping by. Now, this is the final episode on the Stuart Turner 10H model steam engine. And in today's episode, I want to get the engine dismantled and I want to do all of the finishing processes on it. That will mean polishing up all of the bare metal and powder coating all of the cast iron. But I also want to make a small etched brass plate to go on the front of the engine base here. And I've done the artwork for that, and we'll go through the etching process and show you how that works. But first, got a couple of new stickers to go up on the doors, so let's go and check those out. Already put these stickers up on the door. This first one comes from a gentleman named Andre. He goes by the name Rusty on his YouTube channel, Rusty Inventions. Now here's a screenshot of his homepage. He's got a beautiful little Myford lathe and he's currently fitting a DRO to that. And the second one here comes from Stuart's Shenanigans. Try saying that after a few beers. But Stuart lives in the USA, but he's actually a UK expat. And he's currently building the big PM research steam engine, the same one that Blondie Hack's made. So both these guys have been popping up on a lot of other YouTube channels, and that's a good thing. That means they're looking to grow their audience and they're going to produce a lot more content to have a look at. So stop by and have a look. I put the links in the description. Yeah, check them out. Good stuff. This next sticker here is up on what I call my trusted supplier door. Now these are guys that I use regularly for purchasing tools and equipment and materials. And this one is called smcomponents.com.au. Now I needed to buy some of that photosensitive film for doing the brass etching on the nameplate for the steam engine. And I bought some on eBay. And for whatever reason I didn't receive it, and then I needed to find another supplier to get some really quickly because it was holding up the project. So instead of going through eBay, I just did a Google search and found this company, and the proprietor is named Mike Wynn. Now Mike sells all sorts of electronic kits and components and tools and equipment for electronic projects. And when I bought the UV film, he got in touch with me and said, hey, I'm one of your subscribers and I'd like to refund the cost of your purchase. And I said, no, I've got a policy here where I pay for everything I use on the channel, but he went ahead and refunded the money anyway. And he also sent me a set of the solid carbide PCB drills. It's a set of 3, all the different sizes. And I think he felt sorry for me when he watched the video where I tried to drill out that work hardened stainless steel. So thank you very much, Mike. I do appreciate it. And if you're looking for electronic supplies in Australia, check him out. He gets the stuff out really quickly. All right, with this little photo etch plate, I've had a dry run with this. This is on a 2mm thick piece of brass plate, which is too thick for the engine. But I just wanted to dial in the process and see if I can get it right, because it is difficult. There's a lot of steps, and at each step things go wrong. And what happened here was I left this one in the etching solution for too long and it undercut the very small letters between satchel and sun. So there's a word "and" there, which is pretty much gone now. So I've redone the artwork to get rid of those very small letters. But the name Satchel was the name of my uncle, Uncle Len, and he was the one that gave me the castings for the Stuart engine via his son. Now his son is named Glenn, and Glenn has a son named Jeremy. And all 3 of them share a common middle name. So when I was thinking of a name for the engine, I thought that works out really well, Satchel and Sons, and also the S in the name Satchel works out with the big letter S on the valve chest cover. So that's what I went with. And the artwork for this was done in Corel Draw. There it is there. And on the screen here you can see where I've created the image as a regular positive image, and then I've flipped it to make a negative. And when you print this, it's done on overhead transparency film, and you print 2 images and then you layer those images together and hold it together with tape. And the idea of doing that is that you get this really dense black area in the film, so that when you expose it to UV light, it does block the UV light going through to the photosensitive film. So this one is being just made from those 2 separate pieces of film. Alrighty, what I'm going to do is we're going to cut this photosensitive film and put it on the brass. Once I start doing this, you've got to do it away from UV light, so it means no daylight. I'll close the door of the garage, and I've got a yellow bug light here, and I'll be working under that light as I do this. Now I'm just going to gloss over this. There are lots of tutorials on doing this process on YouTube. So this is not meant to be a tutorial. I'm just going to quickly go through it, and we'll get to the etching part and see how it turns out. Wish me luck. Lots can go wrong. When you buy this photosensitive film, it comes in a sort of a black tube, and that's so that if you store it just out in the open, none of the UV light can get through to the film and damage it, because any exposure to UV will cause this stuff to sort of go opaque, and it just doesn't work. So this piece of brass is much bigger than I need it, and I'm only going to work on one end up here. So what we need to do now is get the layer of clear film off the inside of this curled up piece of film, and use two pieces of tape to do this. This has gone wrong already. Yeah, it's stuck to itself, as you can see there. Yeah, that's not going to work. Need to do that again. Alright, I've got that all smoothed down in the part that matters. This end section down here, I'm not going to worry about that. So I've got no air bubbles, no crinkles, no creases. So now we're going to use heat to bond that to the brass. Okay, I've got this iron on the lower setting, basically synthetic setting, and I'm just going to put a piece of paper towel over the top of that, and then we're just going to try and get an even pressure and even amount of heat through into that brass to bond the film to the substrate. When you're doing printed circuit boards, the amount of copper that's on the surface of the board is very thin, so it does heat up very quickly, but with this brass being thicker and a better heat sink, because of the mass, you've got to use a little bit more heat and a bit more time. And this bonding process is fairly critical. So that rubber roller just puts an even pressure on the film. And if you've done it right, it shouldn't peel off easily. Right, I'm just going to trim off the excess film here. Okay, I think we're ready to do the exposure on this now. This is what I'm using to expose the film. So I've got a sheet of glass just held in a plywood frame, and I've got a UV light underneath that, and I've got my transparency film sitting on top of the glass. And what you should see is, from where I'm looking, the lettering should look reversed. So as it's exposed from the underside, it will be correct. So I'm going to put our piece of brass over the image. And I'm going to put something heavy on that to keep everything in contact. Okay, I'm going to do this exposure for 2.5 minutes, then we can flip it over and you should see the image in the film. You're not seeing anything on the camera. So I'll cut this and we'll come back at 2.5 minutes. Alrighty. You're probably having trouble seeing that, but I can see the exposed image on the film there. Now there is another clear layer on top of this which I'll remove, just putting a piece of tape in the corner and tearing that off, and then we've got to develop this, which will remove the coating, which you can see there is in that lighter purple. and that will leave the dark purple intact on the part. So there's our top layer coming off. Okay, we'll go and mix up the developer and see how this turns out. Okay, the developer is just ordinary tap water, and I'm using a teaspoon of sodium carbonate or washing soda. So this just makes an alkaline solution, just a mild alkaline, and that will etch away or dissolve that lighter purple colour on the mask. Okay, that's pretty much dissolved, so I'm just going to put a piece of brass in there. And then what you want to do is get a soft paintbrush and just agitate the solution, and this also helps to break up that film and remove it. Okay, this can take up to 5-10 minutes, so I won't make you watch, I'll bring you back when it's nearly done. Okay, this has been more like about 15 minutes and it's about 95% done. I'm not completely happy with it. The centre of that letter A is not coming out as it should, so I may end up doing this all over again. I suspect I left the UV light on for too long, and some of the UV has bled through the black areas in the film and just sort of over hardened the area that we're trying to remove. But yeah, I'll bring you back when I've got a good one and then we'll do the etching. I let that harden up overnight and had a look at it. It's okay. It's not as crisp as I would like it to be, but we're trying to replicate a cast brass nameplate, so it's not going to have those super precise edges anyway. And I put clear packing tape on the front and the back to protect these areas where the brass is exposed. And this tag acts as a sort of a handle so we can hang it in the etching tank. Now I've got the tank heating up next door, so I'll go and have a look. This is my etching tank. Now this is made of clear acrylic, and it's been made deliberately very thin so you can hang parts vertically in the etching solution and you don't need as much solution in the tank. And I'm using ferric chloride, and I've got a small aquarium heater in here to bring the temperature up to about 34 degrees C. It's the middle of winter here, so the daytime temperature is only about 22, and the ferric chloride works more effectively when it's warm. Now the air bubble device in here just helps to circulate the solution, and it washes out any of the debris from the brass plate as it etches. And I've got a thin wire here, and I'm going to hang the part on the wire in that solution, and then you just monitor it. You've got to be careful. If you leave it in the solution for too long, the etching will undercut the mask, and that means you'll lose some of those small thin details like the little letters. Okay, I'm just going to watch that now. It probably takes about 20 minutes. It's been about 20 minutes and it seems to be going pretty good. I've rinsed that off, and you sort of run your finger over it and get a sense of how deep that etch is. It's only got to be deep enough just to take the powder coat, and then it'll be rubbed off on the surface to expose the brass letters. So I'm going to give that about another 10 minutes and I think it's going to be okay. Okay, I think that's deep enough. I'll go and rinse it and show you, and then I've just got to cut the plate to shape and drill the holes. It's not easy to get a sense of how deep that is, but I think we got a decent etch and I didn't lose any of the letters, so yeah, I'm happy. Okay, I've cleaned the mask off that with some acetone and I've just polished the edges. But I'll put this aside now, and when we do the powder coating on the engine, I'll put a colour on that and then we just buff off the surface to expose the lettering. As you can see, I've got the brass plate screwed to the side of the engine base now, and these are round head brass 9BA screws. That plate's got to come off now, and we've got to get all the parts prepped for powder coat, and that brings us to the thorny topic of colour. Now, these are the parts of the engine that are going to need to have some sort of a coloured coating on them. Now, some of these parts I'll just do in a satin black, like the cleating for the cylinder and this engine base, but all of the other parts are going to need some other colour. Now, if you do a Google search for steam engine, you will find that the majority of models especially are usually finished in sort of a claret or a burgundy colour, or maybe something like a Brunswick green or a mid green, and then you might see the odd one that's all black with coloured lining. But other than that, there doesn't seem to be a lot of choice. And some of the historical photos are usually engravings or just black and white photos, so it's very hard to tell what colours the builders would have used on traditional engines. Now, I've got these two colours here. This one is called Plateau Green, this one is called Shrek Green, and I think I'm going to go with this one here, the Plateau Green. Now, my reason for doing that is that this type of engine would normally be found on maybe like a farm, like a dairy farm for driving a pump, or maybe in a small industrial workshop in an industrial area, and they'd be stuck away in a back room, and they wouldn't really be designed as showpieces. So some of the big engines used in public facilities like pumping works and so on, they were beautifully finished, and they would have lots and lots of polished brass work and ornate lining on them. But this is more of a working engine, and I think this sort of colour here is going to work. So that's what I'm going with, and I know some people won't like it, but yeah, it's my engine. Now, that also brings us to the topic of how do you mask off the areas where you don't want the powder coat to go. So some of these mating surfaces, like the end of the cylinder here, we don't want any powder coat on the surface, so we need to think of a way of masking that off. So let's have a look at that. If we were just painting this engine with conventional paint, you just use masking tape to cover up the areas where you don't want any colour on the part. So for example, on the flywheel, I want to leave this surface of the flywheel just bare cast iron, and also the very edge of the rim. So I just coat that with masking tape and paint it, and then you peel it off. However, because we're using powder coat, we need to use a heat resistant tape, and you've got three choices. This one here is Kapton tape. Now, Kapton is highly heat resistant, but it doesn't flex very well, it tears easily, and also the tape is not as sticky as I would like it to be. Now, this stuff works well on big flat surfaces, but on all of the little tiny details on this, I don't think it's going to work. Now, this is another option. This is a woven fiberglass tape. This came with the powder coat gun kit when I bought it, and it's sort of nice and flexible, but it doesn't like to bend around sharp corners. You can bend it and it will just pop off again. So it's not as sticky as I would like it to be either. So I'm going to use this stuff here now. This is a specialist powder coating tape. I've got three different widths here, and this stuff is very, very soft and flexible. The glue on the back of it is nice and sticky, and it does hold up well in the heat of the powder coating oven. So that's what I'll be using. And what I need to do now is get all of these parts. I'm going to clean them in the ultrasonic cleaner. These have already been bead blasted. So what we need to do is just get it chemically clean, and then we'll start masking everything off. Before I mask these parts off, I'm going to wash these in the ultrasonic cleaner. I've got washing soda in there, hot water, and we're just going to cycle that for about 10 minutes. Probably see all that grime in the washing soda, and even those parts look clean when I put them in. As soon as I started the ultrasonic cleaner, all the oil came out of them. Okay, I'll go and rinse these, and I'm just going to dry them in the powder coat oven. Forgot one. Now I'm just going to show you the two parts that I'll be doing in satin black, and then I'll do one other part because that will demonstrate most of the masking processes that I need to use. So with this engine base here, once that came out of the oven, there was a little bit of flash rust on the surface, and I've cleaned that off with some red Scotch-Brite. As long as you're wearing gloves and you don't get fingerprints or oil from your skin on the parts, they're fine. And what I've done here is I've filled those threaded holes where the little 9B8 screws go with some bamboo skewers. So I've just wound them in and cut them off, and that will keep the threaded hole clean. And what we'll do now is we'll go and hang this one up next door, get the powder on it, we'll bake it, and then, like I say, I'll just show you one other part. Now this engine base has been in the oven. I've actually preheated this because it had some JB Weld filler in some of the defects, and what I've found is that it doesn't always cover where the JB Weld has been put into the metal, but if you preheat it, the powder fuses as soon as it hits the hot surface. So that's why that's gone slightly glossy, but you'll notice on this part it looks a lot more like a matte black. Okay, got pretty good coverage on those now. I'll go and bake them. Now that thin brass sheet part will cure much more quickly, so I need to keep an eye on that one. As soon as the powder goes sort of glossy, give it 10 minutes, then it comes out to cool. Okay, well, it's looking good. You can see here I've got a whole bunch of these parts prepped. So things like this steam chest, fairly straightforward. Just put a bit of tape on both faces that come into contact with other parts, and then the holes can be plugged with these little silicone plugs. Now you can buy these on eBay, and they come in a whole bunch of different sizes and shapes, and you sort of jam them into holes, and that makes it a lot easier later on when you're fitting parts together. So that one's done. With the cylinder cover, the top cylinder cover, just put a bit of tape, and then you get a sharp blade and just go around and just trim off the excess tape. And this one's a little bit more difficult because it's only the very narrow edge here that shows when the engine is assembled. So I had to mask off both of the faces on that one there. The top cover for the valve chest, fairly straightforward. With the flywheel, it's too hard to try and mask off this very narrow rim. So what I'll do later on is I'll just spin that in the lathe and I'll just sand off whatever powder coat lands on that surface. And you can see I've plugged both sides of the bore there. And the other issue then is you've got to find a place to put a wire through these parts so you can hang them. But I can jam that through the keyway, and with these I'll just punch a hole in the tape and hang it up that way. Now this one here is going to be interesting because I need to mask off the surface where the bearing will go. And you can see I've already done that one there. And then this bore that runs through for the crosshead needs to be protected. We don't want to get any powder coat in there, but I do want to get powder coat in this window on the side here. So to take care of that one, I've made up a wooden plug, and it's split, and I can drive a wedge in there, and it's a fairly loose fit in the bore. So when I go to remove it, it's going to be fairly easy to get it out. It won't get stuck there with powder coat. And I put tape on the surface that will be visible when we do the powder coating. And then what I can do is just simply jam that wedge in there, and that will keep it tight in the bore. Now I'll need to get some tape on this surface here, so I'll do that first, and then I'll show you what it looks like before it goes in next door for powder coating. Okay, I made that look much harder than it really is. I was trying to do it with the part facing the camera. So I can drive that little wooden plug in there now. And then put the wedge in from the back. Alright, so that's nice and firm. So I'll get this other bearing surface done and then we'll go next door and we'll powder coat this one. I won't show the other parts, but I'll show you when they're done. Now I've had this part preheating as well because it's got some undercuts and difficult areas. Let's see how we go. This area in here between that flange and the end of the base is going to be the hardest part. Okay, I think that's good. Yeah, don't drop it, Mark. Oh, it's just come out of the oven. Pretty happy with it. We'll have to wait till it cools down and have a really good look. That's our little brass nameplate that's been powder coated in a colour called Hawthorn Green, and I've just stuck that to this little piece of wood with some double-sided tape. So to remove the surface off the lettering, I've just got some 400 grit wet and dry taped down to a piece of plate glass, and we're just going to rub that gently on the wet and dry until we expose the raised areas on that plate there. So I use a little bit of water. Nearly. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. It's a little bit dull right in the center, but I'll just work on that locally, just with a little tiny bit of wet and dry. I'm just worried if I go too far at these outer edges, I'll start removing the powder coat from the very ends. It's probably got a slight curve in it, but I think that's going to work. Alright, I think that's good. This will get a clear coat and that gets screwed to the base of the engine. Well, here it is. Now it's all running. I've run this on compressed air and it runs beautifully. But I must tell you, it took nearly 2 days at work after I finished all of the powder coating to get it to this point. So there's a lot of work involved in fettling all of the parts and making sure everything fits neatly, cleaning off any excess powder coat that was there. And I must say that at this time of my life, I'm finding it really frustrating trying to make all of these little fasteners go together. So the little brass round-headed screws that hold the cleaning onto the cylinder nearly drove me insane, but I got it done. Now I did make new gaskets for the steam cylinder and the valve chests, and I made them out of this red fibre material. Now this stuff's quite sturdy, and you can dismantle the engine without any worry about breaking the gaskets. And the extra thickness in that material didn't seem to bother the engine at all. There's no real clearance issues there at all. Now, when I run the engine on air, you'll notice that the flywheel is not running perfectly true, and that really annoys me. Now, I've run the key in there as hard as it will go, and that means that I probably won't be able to get the key out again easily. But what I will do is mount this in the lathe and put an indicator on the edge of the flywheel, and I think I can just sort of tap the flywheel in and get it running perfectly true. For now, it's near enough. Now, this engine's going upstairs in my display cabinet. I don't want to do any more on this just at the moment. The long-term plan is that I want to build a coal-fired boiler to run this engine. I want the engine to run something like a lighting set or a dynamo, and I've got a Stuart steam water pump that can be used to fill the boiler independently of this engine. So it's going to be finished in the same coloured powder coat, the same style. So that's the long-term plan, but I've got other projects I need to get onto. In fact, when you see the next video, I'll be working on a woodworking project, which is a bit new for me. Now, you might be wondering about this little steam fitting here. Now, this was given to me 2 days ago by my cousin Glenn. Now, Glenn is Len Satchel's son. Len was the original owner of these castings, and Glenn gave them to me. But he also gave me this box with there's a water pump, there's a water gauge, there's a couple of pressure gauges in there, and these are all parts for the Rob Roy steam locomotive. Now, I'm sort of trying to work out a time frame for building that engine, but just for now, it's on the back burner, but it probably will get done. Alrighty, I think we need to see this running now, and when you come back to see the next video, as I say, it's going to be something completely different, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And let's run this on air now, and I'll say cheerio, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.